From To Keto LLC, it's Keto Woman Podcast with Daisy Brackenhall.
Hello, Keto Lovelies. I'm Daisy Brackenhall, and I've spent most of my life struggling with my weight and confidence, and have always had a difficult relationship with food. Even when I finally got to my target weight, after weight loss surgery and eating low carb, I couldn't maintain it and I was miserable. Keto has given me the freedom to fall in love with food again, without the constant gain, loss, guilt, virtue cycle of before. Health and happiness is where it's at now, running on fat. Welcome to the Keto Woman Podcast. Each week I'll be chatting to inspirational women, maybe even the odd man, to discover the secrets to their success so that I can share them with you. So what is keto? Keto is a way of eating that enables you to switch your body's main fuel source from sugar to fat. Who doesn't want to be a fat burner, right? But how do we achieve this? A great place to start is by keeping carbs to 20 grams or less per day. So things like leafy greens and above ground vegetables, plus some nuts and seeds, and the incidental carbs you find in things like dairy. Moderate protein, scale to your lean body mass, and then fat to satiety. Once you're in the swing of things, you can tweak it to suit you. Make your own personalised keto. I'll be asking my guest each week what their keto looks like to show you just how flexible and fabulous this way of eating can be. I'm not a doctor, and most of my guests won't be either, so we can't give you medical advice. It's always best to work with your own doctor because they know you and your medical history, and so have access to the bigger picture. Thank you, Louise Reynolds, for supporting me and this podcast by making a pledge at my Patreon page. Do you want to hear your name here at the top of the show? Are you enjoying this podcast and would like to help me make more episodes? Then head to my Patreon page at patreon.com/KetoWoman, or hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It means a great deal to me, and you will get to headline the show just like Louise did today. This week's extraordinary woman is Annette Bosworth, MD. Annette is an internal medicine physician based in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She has over 19 years of experience helping patients overcome long-term chronic conditions through lifestyle adjustment, preventative medicine, and other therapeutic paths. She's been mentioned in media outlets ranging from CNN, Time, US News and World Report to Fox News. In addition to medicine, she loves speaking at town halls, jails, churches, and universities. From politics to mission work, she lets her faith lead her to the next chapter of life, always looking for teachable moments. Along with her husband, she savours the adventure of raising 3 energetic, fast-growing sons through debate, wrestling, music and theatre. She fights for the underdog and encourages patients with chronic health problems to fight it any way you can. Ketones for life. There was just too much to cover in Annette's story to cram into just one episode, so we are taking 2 weeks to tell it all. I'm sure you can't wait to get to hear the rest of Annette's story. So without further ado, here is part 2. Welcome back, Annette, to the Keto Woman podcast. Last week we were digging into your very interesting backstory that led to what I suspected was a big cliffhanger and turning point in your life. So perhaps we can pick up where we left off and you can tell us what happened next.
Right. Well, our story ended last week when the state of South Dakota investigated my services to the underserved community with a term called Medicaid fraud. And in America, when you have Medicaid fraud, all money stops. So my husband and I had a choice point to make. And this is on the foundation of our recent service work in Haiti, raising 3 boys with the mindful, intentional outcome to say, do not raise them with a sense of entitlement. How do you do that in today's world? I don't think that's an easy answer. And we had a life of abundance. We had saved and lived off of one income, paid debt off with the other person's income, and now we were at this point where all money stopped. And I was doing really great work. It was such a rewarding process to work in the place I was working. And the injustice that they didn't want me to use a treatment program that was standard protocol because no one in my state had done it before, that was absurd. Like, well, I'll just stand still and do what I'm supposed to do.
It's a ridiculous philosophy, isn't it? You can't use it because nobody else has done it. Well, how do we ever progress if we take that attitude?
And I believe that is the spirit of what happens when government decides who is going to get treated, who's not going to get treated, what the treatment protocol is. I mean, the fact that we have to have laws that a doctor does an ethical job, I don't think you can ever mandate moral fiber to the level of the intimate relationship that's needed between people. I don't do that to a level that I do because the law says so. I do it because of who I am and where I came from and what my story of origin instilled in me. And as a mom, I'm doing the same thing to the next generation. But here I was.
Well, surely it's a part of your fiber and being to go into that profession in the first place is to be helping other people. So you must have that kind of philosophy, just comes with the package.
Right. And I think that's found in many professions. That I've said many times, I love being a physician, but I could have found the purposeful journey in several professions because that moral installation of connect, community, responsibility for your neighbor is part of my fiber. Every mentor I've had, every strong female that's shown me the path ahead has that connection back to their community. So my husband and I made a choice that we were going to fund the clinic off of our assets. And we started selling. We sold the lake house. We sold the boats. We sold the kids' college education. We sold the fancy cars. We got down to selling our house. And we moved into a donated RV in the middle of November of 2012.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bit of a change.
Right. So here's like, what's an RV? 120 square feet, maybe. And I'm walking into the RV and I'm definitely having PTSD from Haiti. And the newspaper article actually said the doctor that serves the homeless is now homeless herself. And I was on another newspaper article that tells part of the truth, but said enough that the medical board and the AG wanted this case closed. And, you know, the Medicaid fraud usually turns into millions of dollars of fines or, I mean, if you're going to look at somebody and you're going to try to find problems, you can always find a problem and you can find a rule they broke. But all of the combing through that they did, there was no error. And that alone is a miracle, to be at a perfect performance when somebody is studying you. You know, thank God that there wasn't, you know, I not dotted, T not crossed. But what it really did for me was it empowered me to say, if they attacked me this harsh, imagine if you had a secret. You know, imagine if you were the physician that was, I don't know, sleeping with a neighbor or something where you didn't want anybody to know. And the government officials came after you, and the amount of pressure to just cave and admit that you had done something wrong. I mean, that's what they wanted the whole time. Just admit you did something wrong. I'm like, no. And it was in that RV where I had just a very reflective time that said, what happens when the people making the rules are so far away from serving the people? And I'm not in China. I'm in America. This shouldn't be this distance. It should be the people on the front lines who help make these policies, who help infuse the rules to leave the power for the ones that are serving without so much regulation. And this is me from the inside of a shelter saying that. So a long story, my husband and I had some very intimate, prayerful moments of saying, what's the right thing to do? And I got a few calls from Washington, D.C. to say there's an open seat for the United States Senate in your state. We'd like you to run. And this is so out of my league. Like, this brings me back to that pageant in Hawaii saying, there's just no way. It's out of my league. Mm-hmm. And then to just be thankful for the people in my tribe, my husband who could keep my blinders off, my children who could say, Mom, we've been to Haiti with you. We know you're doing what's right, even though you're on the front page of the newspaper. They moved into the RV, and, if you go back and ask my kids, which life did you like better? The life of abundance or the one where we were in the RV and the stuff was gone, but the relationships were close every time they answer the RV. And so there was this kind of family tide that had changed as far as how do I give my kids this servant's heart in today's world, off of the family farm and away from that little town of 800 people. And, that had come through the service work in Haiti, the service work in my own state. And then I stood up and said, okay, I'm going to run for U.S. Senate. And some pretty big miracles happened. I sent out a letter to say, this is my intention. And I got unbelievable response. Like, I was so, first I didn't have any money to do that. I just leveraged all my assets to keep the clinic open. And so, I said, God, if this is going to happen, you're going to show me that it's possible because I don't have the resources. It's got to be you. And here was this response that was beyond anybody's expectations, beyond my expectation. But it brought me to the table of having the real run for U.S. Senate. What does that look like? I've never run for anything before. And so this now gets us up to Christmas time. The election will be a primary election, which is the most important part for our state because most of the people running were Republican. I was running on the Republican ticket. And it was Christmas time, 2013, where I got a call from the people where I'd done a lot of mission work in Haiti had said, Dr. Bosworth, you're really good at this mission stuff. I don't know if you've seen what's happened in the Philippines, but that typhoon took away 2/3 of the people. And we just need somebody who's been on the ground and done this before. We have supplies that we can't even get to the front lines because we don't have those skills. And I'm thinking, I don't have time for this. I'm trying to balance the clinic and my kids and my husband and the U.S. Senate campaign. So many things. But I could hear the lady from saying, I'm going to send you home to pray about that.
I was going to say, it sounds very familiar. And I bet your husband had something to say about it too.
Yeah. He just said, just don't answer yes or no. Just let's think about it. And of course, we spend time just saying, what are our priorities? What happens when I go on a mission trip is I really do get restored. You sleep on a dirt floor, you have no resources. You can hear the cockroaches going up the side of the walls where you sleep. And you'd think, how can you come back feeling better? But it's universal. Every time I come home from a mission trip, I feel full. I feel energized.
Well, I was going to say earlier, actually, when you were talking about if you asked your children which period of time they like best, and I think it's interesting that there is often a correlation between that increase or intensity in relationships you have and the community you make with not having stuff. So the more stuff you have, it seems often that community spirit, whether it be with family or, community or your church or whoever it is, or people you're helping in Haiti or the Philippines, that goes down the more stuff you have. And it does seem to work the other way. You hear this incredible spirit of community in the most seemingly horrendous situations that you wouldn't want to be in. But these people build this incredible spirit.
It's absolutely true. When we were in the RV, I had more people either invite our family over for dinner or just show up and there was a tater tot casserole sitting there hot. Like, we didn't lock the RV because there's nothing in it. It's like some clothes if you want them, but why lock it? The toilets froze the first week we were in there. So we were always going to the bathroom at the community park there. And, there were times when I look at the friendships that reached out to me when we were living in the RV and think, that's the person that I want to be. And here it was just getting ministered to me as an example. What does that look like? And you live in a world where garage doors go up and down and cars go in and out, and you can go weeks without speaking to your neighbor because you've made your life so convenient. And it's almost like in the inconvenience is when your intimacy and your vulnerability kind of peak to give you the fullness in your life.
Your life becomes enriched in situations you just wouldn't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing you went to the Philippines.
Yes, we went to the Philippines. And right before we left for the Philippines, we did something very important in a campaign. We put out our petitions. And petitions are these pieces of paper that you need to collect. You need to get signatures of folks in your party. They need to be registered as voters. And you need, in our state, I needed 2,000 signatures, which might not sound like a lot for other states, but in our state, we're very sparsely populated. So there's lots of distance between people. And these signatures are gathered in the 3 coldest months of the year. So January, February, March is when they're gathered. So it's a struggle to get, we would be standing outside of a ball game with our clipboards saying, are you a registered Republican? You don't have to vote for me. I just want to get on the ballot. And gathering 2,000 signatures, it's not easy. It's a lot of work.
So again,
right,
you need that community to help you with that effort.
Mm-hmm. So as soon as I was headed to the Philippines, I sent out an email to my patient saying, I know some of you don't agree with my choice to run because they all were seeing the loss of their doctor, but I feel this calling and I would ask for your support. Please come sign my petitions. And I'd never done this before, but the lawyer that was my campaign advisor, who'd done this many times, the expert in my area, he was going to the Philippines with us. And he and I, we set up the process. And unfortunately, I didn't read the fine print as well as I should have. It says, did you witness the signatures? And these, of course, are signatures of my sister, of people in my staff, of preachers throughout the state. And the forms that I signed, that I circulated, because I sent them out, or I laid them on my desk there at the clinic, and my patients came in and signed them, and I knew them. I know who they are. There were 6 petitions and less than 24 signatures that were on these forms where I didn't witness the signatures.
What? So you're telling me that everyone who runs and gets these petitions has to witness every single signature?
If you sign as the circulator on that petition, you have to witness it. And that's the rule I didn't understand. I'd never done this before. I thought circulating was part of sending them out. I have this campaign advisor who co-signed, he notarized them with me. So he's the expert. I don't get any signal from him that we're doing anything wrong. And I mean, there's been shenanigans in the history of America for running for office. Like if you signed dead people, like there was somebody who got arrested for this in the same cycle, and he signed Mickey Mouse to his petitions. These people weren't dead. They weren't fake. They were real live people who registered with the state of South Dakota. And I had 1,000 extra signatures. So they weren't needed. Okay. So even if there were some mistakes, throw them out. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But this wasn't a problem until the first quarter of the election comes in, and here's this newbie on the scene, and timing is everything. It was this week where the opponent that I was running against had just made national news for his commercial that talked about family values, but was using stock photos of a family. And so the incongruency there. Mm-hmm. And then I had raised like $760,000 in that quarter. And the average campaign contribution was $45. So in America, you have to report it when they're over 200. So here are all these donations of unreported names because it was the grassroots. That's what that looks like. And my opponent had 720,000, and the average size of his campaign contribution was 10,000. So he was getting him from the big facilities, and I was grassroots, and he had this negative commercial. And his influence over the politics in our state, that attorney general that had done the investigation on me was suddenly investigating every petition. And black vans were showing up at churches saying, don't you know that I run that 501c3 offer you have to stay as a nonprofit? Why are you supporting her? And what happens next is I'm going to fast forward. On election day, I was arrested for 12 felonies, charged with 12 felonies because I didn't witness 6 of these petitions. So perjury is the word they used, where I lied. That's what that word translates to. And then the second 6 felonies were for submitting these falsified forms to the state of South Dakota. And never in the history of the United States of America has anyone ever been arrested for election violations to this felony level times 12. And of course, it makes national news. You still can't Google my name without finding the half-truths that end up there. I have all these campaign advisors saying, you're going to be fine. This has never happened before. They usually get a $100 fine, $150 fine if they write a fake name down. These were all authentic people. This will never turn into, maybe you won't even get a grand jury to agree. It's such a ridiculous claim. Well,
yeah, exactly. It's they're just trying to pick on something, some little loophole that they can find. There were no Mickey Mouses to find.
Yeah, within days I'm indicted, and so now we have a trial. In the state of South Dakota, finding a lawyer was a nightmare because the top lawyer, your attorney general, was very, very controlling, and I had rocked the boat. I had run for U.S. Senate without anybody's permission. I did this because I wanted things to change. I wanted the conversation to change. And medicine had turned into a conversation of, is it covered by your insurance, instead of, is this what's right for you? Which brings back to this ketogenic diet. The fast forward, 1.3 million in legal that year, another repeat balance the following. The amount of money it took to sustain and pay off bills was out of this world. And I get a trial in May of 2015. And instead of it being in my hometown, it was in the attorney general's hometown. And so I got a guilty verdict for 12 felonies. I was sentenced to 24 years in prison.
Gosh.
Yeah. And so you get 30 days after you've been found guilty to be sentenced. And, nothing's gone right. Nothing's gone right since the moment where I started getting investigated. So I have people saying it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. But I can't believe anything anyone's saying anymore. And I have 30 days to close up my practice. Because if you if you know you're going to transition away from your medical practice and you don't provide the transition, there's rules against that, So here I was scrambling to get all patients seen and transferred. And I drove into Pierre, South Dakota to get sentenced. And I said goodbye to my kids for certain that this was going to turn out with. And here I was, standing in front of a judge. My mind couldn't slow down. My husband's heart is broken. My heart's broken. And 24 years in prison. And then he said the words, but we will probate it with 500 hours of community service. And what that translates to is, I see that you serve the poor. I want you to serve the poorest people in South Dakota. And I need 500 hours, which is a lot of hours, but I didn't care. It was not in jail. That's all I cared. And so I walked out of the courtroom, never having expected that was what I was going to get. And I heard the words from my husband saying, we can find an opportunity here for you to restore. Because in that time, the stress was unbelievable. I talked to people about their cortisol levels, and I don't even want to know. In the time from when I ran to when I got sentenced, I think I put on 40 pounds. The next year of living on the road, serving people in Pine Ridge, which is one of the poorest counties in our country, It's an Indian reservation where they needed a doctor, and their jail was filled with people who needed a physician. So I did that for this 500 hours of community service and several other organizations within that community, educating them on brains and addiction. And it is what I did, but I put on I was 70 pounds heavier. And during this whole time, we are appealing to the Supreme Court, saying we think the Attorney General abused his power. We think this is an injustice. And so by the end of 2016, we've submitted to the Supreme Court, and they made a ruling on my case in the summer of 2017. So we had to wait forever for the Supreme Court to make a decision, which isn't like a big deal. That's time is what that happens in a Supreme Court ruling. But during that time, the medical board said, she's got 12 felonies. You can't be a doctor. And so despite getting a lineup of people who have seen my good work, who've gone to Haiti, who've served the poor, I got the dean of the medical school. I had an unbelievable lineup of patients and colleagues saying, don't take away her medical license.
And bearing in mind that the sentence that you've been given, and you can see that, can't you? And that's where the power that the judge has, whatever, guilty or not guilty, whatever sentence has been given, they have the power to then look at the person and say, well, no, I'm not going to put her in prison for 24 years and give her this community service. But by giving you the community service in doing what you do, in using your profession to help people. I
needed the medical license.
They're saying the opposite of that. They're saying that you are doing what you're supposed to do. You are worthy in your profession, and giving their seal of approval on it by asking you to carry on and doing that work. So then for the medical board to turn around and basically disagree with that must have been an incredible
the medical board has a set of rules, and they are also governed by the Attorney General's office in our state. So the separation was difficult to sit there saying they get to make this decision and I got to live with it. They unanimously voted to remove my medical license. And at this point, I can't find a lawyer. Like, everybody's scared to touch the case. They don't want to oppose the Attorney General. And I filed the paperwork myself to fight it, to say, no, you shouldn't take away my medical license. First of all, that's how I'm doing my community service in Pine Ridge. And it had nothing to do with the practice of medicine. And so it gets put into appeal. I actually win in the circuit court to keep my medical license. Meanwhile, I've closed my practice. I'm seeing people in Pine Ridge, and I'm devastated. I'm heartbroken that I can, my kids go to school hearing your mom's the 12-time felon. I mean, the year prior, I was the one leading the talk on how do you serve your community. And I don't even have the strength to go in front of a crowd again thinking, look what happened when I opened my mouth. Look what happened when I stood up. If they wanted to shut me up, I guess 12 felonies was how you do it. And in this sideline, I have this amazing man standing next to me saying, don't let them take away what's the best part of you. And I just can't be thankful enough to say, what if he wouldn't have been there? What if he would have given up hope? And I think there's a gift you get to give your kids is the example of the life you live. And, being a good doctor was what I was hoping they were seeing. But they didn't see me be a doctor. This was the closest they saw was when we were in Haiti. They saw me get up and go to work every day and hide behind HIPAA and the protections and the rules. And that wasn't what I was trying to show them. And when you watch the journey of how low I got in that year and a half, I was almost thankful that I could go 600 miles away to serve this community. So my kids didn't have to see how down I was, how sad I was, because that resilience was broken. And then in the middle of all that, my mom, So it's 2015 and I'm driving back and forth to this 600 mile away destination. And I listened to a podcast by Tim Ferriss, and he's talking to Dom D'Agostino. I'm a lifetime learner. So, if I'm going to drive all this way, if I'm going to have time away from my kids, I feel valuable if I've learned something, and I'm looking for any way to feel valuable again. I can't hardly see the person in the mirror as somebody valuable anymore. Sorry. So I hear this podcast of Dom D'Agostino. I've never heard him before, but I do like how Tim Ferriss has taken his struggles and made a podcast out of it. And how do you life hack out of being stuck? And he really has. So here he was interviewing this man who's a bodybuilder, who's a metabolism health expert, and he's talking about ketones and cancer. And that wasn't the part that got me as curious as the information about ketones and brain health. And as I said on the first part of this, that's really the tapestry of my clinic is we collect broken brains and we fix them. And I don't think it's an accident to see that my brain was broken. I couldn't save myself, but I couldn't not listen to what he was saying, well, this is pretty good evidence. This is like anti-seizure data that I know I've heard this somewhere, but I can't quite find it in my cloudy brain of how did I learn that? Why would I know those words?
So it's really appealing to those parts of you that have helped you in the past.
Yeah. And I don't dabble in things. So I think the next thing I find was that Cape Town, low carb, high fat conference had happened, and for $50, you could buy the lectures. And so I couldn't find anybody else talking about this. I couldn't find this in my medical textbooks. I even went to the med school library saying, do you have a book on ketosis? And all I could find is a couple of paragraphs about seizures. I'm thinking, I know I heard this right. I've listened to it a couple times. Why is this so hard to find? And so, I've got this time in between, the work I'm doing in the jail, and I've got a crop full of broken brains right in front of me. Meaning they're in jail. They've got a history of addiction and alcoholism and poverty. They're right there in my own state. And so you say, oh, let's see if this works. And so then the first thing I try to do is I try to get me into ketosis. And I completely screwed it up. Like, I'm trying to follow these rules. I can't get my dang keto stick to turn pink. Like, what am I doing wrong? And I specifically remember going on a hike around our city, which was like, I can't remember if it's 27 miles or something like that. But my kids and I went on this 27-mile hike, and it was representing the number of troops for Memorial Day, how many troops commit suicide. I can't remember if it's an hour or a day, but it was this testimony to mental health, to, our military, and my kids and I did this together. And so I woke up and I said I was only going to drink water and have salt. And by the end of the day, I was peeing ketones. And so I can specifically remember the day I peed my first ketone. Mm-hmm. And that leads into what happened next, which was this whole time I moved back to South Dakota in part because my mom had cancer. And she had a cancer of her lymph nodes. And the cancer is really decided, like, how bad is your cancer? Well, we decide that based on how quickly it replicates. So her cancer was dividing when we first moved to South Dakota every 4 years. Really slow growing, no problem. She has this little label in her chart, but that's about it. And in recent years, she's had to have chemo. I take it personal that some of the chemo was because her daughter's on the front page of the newspaper, not just in her home city or her home state, but across the country. And so there's a lot of guilt associated with I'm causing her stress. And it was this moment where she had now gotten to a part where it was doubling every 4 weeks, and we were due for a cancer visit. And as we're sitting I haven't told her anything about ketosis. I don't even know if I can explain it well to her yet. Again, my brain's not working great. I've got these extra 70 pounds. I'm in a super strange version of my life saying, I don't know where it's going to be tomorrow. But just before the oncologist walks in, she goes, if he says chemo, which would be her third round of chemo, I've put a stack of clothes on the top shelf in my closet. And those are the ones I want you to use for my funeral. And I'm like, no, you can't die. And part of it was because she wasn't this Mary Poppins woman that she used to be. The cancer had really slowed down her brain. She was 50 pounds overweight. Her skin was like, she may have been 71, but it looked 100. It was just thin, and her body was like a zombie.
It's an incredibly grueling process, isn't it? Chemotherapy.
Yes. And so, of course, the doctor comes in, he says chemotherapy. And she doesn't quite have the strength to tell him that she's not going to do it, but she takes the pink slip of paper, and you're supposed to take it down the hall and get signed up for chemo. And as we're walking down the hall, I ask her, Mom, do you trust me? And she says, with all my life. I said, let's put off chemo for 6 weeks, and I want you to do this with me. And that was the beginning of this book that I wrote, it's called Any Way You Can. And I believe that's a great theme for keto, that there are so many versions of how you can get to ketosis that we did it very sloppy. We did it really backwards, but we did it. We walked through this story together. I said, Mom, I've been really studying this process about how to fight cancer, how to improve a brain. I don't know a lot about it, but the science is really solid. Like, it's not just a fluke. And I'm kind of embarrassed that I have not ever heard of it, but I think the space in my life where I've had for the last 6 months where I just got to study this has been a powerful connection. And so I would take her little lessons, trying to feed her, because her brain was foggy, my brain was foggy, little lessons. And she lived 100 miles away from me. And so we'd have a keto lesson, and then we'd, see how she was doing. And I'd give her another little lesson, and I kept these lessons. And so I put them into this book, interjected with her story. And I am a geek. I would read lots of, metabolic health, diet books, or just even health books. But I could never get a patient to read a book about it, because it's like, barf, what? I don't want to read a biology book. And I'm like, no, you never were going to inspire patients to change behavior based on a bunch of metabolism and draws of mitochondria. You're going to lose your audience. But you can take a 71-year-old woman who says, I'm done. I want to die. And her daughter who's trying so hard to say, oh, Mom, I missed the boat here. I've been disconnected. I know your health has gone down. Let's do this together. And this story where she should have died like 4 times, like I called my siblings and said, guess what? This is it. This is for real. You just need to be prepared. There's no way she can live through these next 4 days. And through the power of how profound the ketogenic diet is for anti-inflammatory effects, in conjunction with really aggressive medical care. I mean, she had a team of physicians who did not know she was in ketosis the whole time. I wasn't brave enough to tell them that. But the book talks about how she's 71. And I think of it, it's like she goes from being a zombie in that her brain just wasn't firing correctly. She was boggy. She was swollen. Like every part of her was swollen. And the amount of things that got better in that first year of ketosis, I was floored. I would go 6 weeks without seeing her. And I'm like, you just took back the time clock another 5-6 years. And I would get out pictures and I'm looking at it. I'm like, is it my brain? Am I not remembering correctly? But here she was with a full head of hair, with skin that looked like she was 50, not 70. And it was unbelievable how much I kept trying to discover, to say, I need to answer if this is a fluke or if this is real. And in the same time, growing a keto group, and learning how do I find resources for something that's kind of on the edge of taking it to the market as far as patient care goes.
And your dad got on board too, right? I seem to remember it made me laugh.
Yes.
Reading about it. I mean, it was lovely, obviously, that he got on board to support your mum, but The bit that made me laugh was when he was told he was allowed to eat sardines and have salt on things. He was like, I'm in.
Yes, the ketogenic diet kind of awakens the ancestors hidden within you, I think. And, these had been, his daughter's a doctor. You can't eat all that fat. You can't have all that salt. I said those things for a good 15 years, and I should have. That's exactly what every guideline tells me to say to them. And I think when I look at life before keto and life after keto, I have had some blessings happen. So first of all, my mom lived, and she is still alive. She's 74 years old now, and she is, in fact, I gave her permission to die the other day. I said, Mom, the Mary Poppins that you were in my life, and I write about her in the book as a real life Mary Poppins, it disappeared. She died. But she resurrected in these last 2 years of keto, where she is volunteering at the school to read with the second graders. She leads the Sunday school team. She's had even some health setbacks, but it doesn't take her life away like it did before. And, to be 75 and be given this kind of card to say, try again, with something as simple as a ketogenic diet. And I mean that by saying, yep, the rules sound goofy, but pretend you haven't learned anything from your doctor in the last 30 years and just simplify what goes in your mouth and in your cupboards. And you can't believe the amount of time that you have back in your life. You can't believe how clearly your brain will function. And I refuse to go forward without the foundation for healthcare in my clinic to be first, we get ketosis. Then we see, do you need the help of my medications? And I just can't believe how many meds I don't need to prescribe if they're in ketosis for a sustained period of time. It's profound. The journey since that super low time has also been kind of coming full circle to say, stay in the moment, try not to put your blinders on, try not to look too far ahead. The Supreme Court did rule in my favor. They did rule that those perjury charges were unjust. That was not perjury. And that took away 6 of the 12 felonies. And the other 6 were taken away when the judge saw it's called an expunged. It's called several different things in different states, but essentially he erased the felonies because of the service work that I did, the commitment that I had to the underserved community there, and the true remorse that I said, if there's a mistake in my name, cost the state money, I did not intend for it to happen, but it still happened under my leadership. And so I have no felonies. I'm no longer a 12-time felon. My mother is alive, and I have this gift of the time it took to really study what does it look like to be an expert in ketosis. And I don't know that I'm there as far as expertise yet, but blending it with the level of internal medicine and adding ketosis as a first-line step to remove inflammation from the body, I can't believe the number of things that get better.
But isn't it incredible how things have worked? It seems to me that at these points throughout your life and this journey that you've been describing to me, things just happen in the right time. I mean, had it not been for that awful period of time that you were going through, which in many ways I should imagine you wouldn't want to live through again, but it was because you were in that position and you were in your car and you had that time to fill, that you heard that information, that then went on to help you help your mum and change your practice and yourself and do incredible things. So, I mean, out of such an awful place,
right?
It's so reassuring and inspirational to hear, with living in that moment, the philosophy that you have, that something great can come out of that.
Well, I think, looking at your journey as well, like when I look at the ways that you can relate after, I don't believe a doctor needs to have a heart attack to understand a heart attack. I don't believe you need to have chemotherapy to understand it. But I do think there's a connection to say, take your own valleys in life and connect. I mean, go back to the time where you were struggling to say, do I do this gastric surgery? Do I not? And just imagining how difficult, I've heard you talk about that on other podcasts, saying, is it the right thing? Did I have the right doctor? Was I allowing them to invade my body and do surgical changes that were going to be permanent? And to just know that the soup that your brain had to be in, I mean, you say, oh, make sure she has a good friend next to her, helping her think, walking with her through that. I mean, when your valley was low, it's hard to make good decisions. And as I look at what I like to invite into this ketogenic journey, these decisions about your health are really important. And the brain fog that happens to people, even it's not as dramatic as mine, but I mean, my mom's chemo brain and I would say obesity brain definitely impaired her. And I mean, can you talk a little bit about when you were in that moment of saying, who helped you make those decisions?
Interesting. Certainly my mother pushed me to asking the doctor about the weight loss surgery. It wasn't something I'd considered. I thought it was, I had heard about it, but I thought it was something that, that you had to have done privately. And she said that people were having these operations done on the NHS and to talk to my doctor, which is what I did. And it just kind of went from there. I guess in a way I did hand that decision over to other people. I suppose I was so desperate for an answer. Mm-hmm. I'm like you in that I would love that black and white.
Right.
And it seemed like, well, this is the answer to all my problems. This will fix everything. And I've spoken about it a bit before, where you put the blame for all your problems on your weight.
Right.
So there was me, twice the size that I am now. And I just thought, if I lose all this weight, everything will be fine. All my problems will go away. I'll be the happy, confident person I want to be. All my relationships will be great and everything will be wonderful. And so, yes, if somebody's offering me this solution that seems not easy, obviously it's not an easy decision to have surgery, but it seemed like the best decision I could make at the time. And so I went for it. And the original surgery wasn't a good decision because it was the band, which I'm sure you know. Yes, I can see the expression you're making, and that's the expression I make and say the band should be banned because it's an awful thing. Long story short that people have heard before, but I ended up with the gastric sleeve, which has actually worked very well for me. And I don't know if I could go back. And because people have asked me, if you could go back and do it with keto and intermittent fasting, for example, as many people do, and I see incredible inspirational stories. But I don't know if I could, because like you say, when your brain is in a particular place,
right?
I think the way out for me at that time was the help that it gave me and the momentum it gave me, but it only takes you so far. Mm-hmm. And then you have to start falling back on other things. And I think it was a combination of the surgery, of finding low carb and then keto. And to that, I have a person who I met online to thank for that, who pushed me, who challenged me when I was saying things, when I was talking about good carbs versus bad carbs. And she said, hey, you're talking a load of rubbish. But don't take my word for it. Go and look at these sites and read the science. And then come back and we'll have a conversation. And that's when I started on low carb. And then she again, when I'd hit my target weight, but then things went off the rails. And she then pointed me to keto and to the two keto dudes. And, you know enough about me to know how much that changed my life.
But I think that's where that brings, this back full circle is I look at, those moments where these decisions, patients come in and, I've got a 20-minute or a 40-minute slot for them to fit into these really intimate personal decisions. And I contend that the next chapter in medicine that I do will not be done that way. That, if I could go back to your pre-surgical version and say, yep, you do have these options. Here is one of them. It is surgery. And here's what the consequences will be from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now. And they're very real. I buried another patient in the last week who, as much as you chirp about obesity and sleep apnea, he couldn't say yes to the things that he should have said yes to. And you say, well, how can you help them? And I contend that it goes back to that community of 800 people and what that taught me, which is you have to be in relationship with people to change behaviors that stick. One of the things that I hope my book does is it isn't a sciencey book. It is a book that's about a story of a heartbroken daughter and a mom who wants to die. And then watch what happens when we say, let's do this together. And, for the number of, it's only been out on in the world of Amazon for maybe 6 months now, but if you go and look at the reviews, what I love hearing is my wife hasn't picked up a book and read that much in years. And she didn't put that book down until chapter 5. It just sat there and read and is so interested in how to change these behaviors.
I think that's what works. So that's what holds it together. So you've got this really fascinating story. You've got a really gripping story that you want to follow, but then you interject it with that information in a very easy and palatable form, and nice little snippets, right? I'm going to give you some science here, but it's just going to be on one page and it's going to be easy to understand. And then we're going to go back to the story and we're going to talk a bit more about that. And then I'm going to give you some more information when it's relevant. And it works well. It's easy to process.
Right. And I think that one of the things that I've tried to plant some seeds around in my recent chapter, and in fact, I got this idea when I was at Keto Fest, that the tribe that the two keto dudes have created is powerful. Like, I send patients to that podcast before I send them to the pharmacy, because you need a tribe. You need to know you're not alone. And I contend the next step is start a little keto group at your work. I have taken those little science lessons that are in my book, and I put them in like 4-minute videos on YouTube. Or I think the longest one is 8 minutes, or maybe it's 10 minutes on YouTube, to say, no, each week you get together, you listen to that little video, and then you check in. How are you doing? Are you losing weight? Are you stalled out? If so, send me a message on that video, and I will answer your group saying, here's what I would do. Here's some, I can't substitute for medical advice, but I can teach you about ketosis in all the safety, saying, no, we're helping people get healthier. And I think that is the first and foremost job of physicians, is to be well versed in the least invasive way to help them, and then be the seeds that allow these tribes to form. And I have a couple people who say, no, I could never be a keto leader. And I want you to do a keto group in my area. I'm like, start doing one. I'll dial in and be there with you electronically, but you live 300 miles away from me. And if you watch those videos and use that as a way to kind of keep educating yourself, it's in little pockets of information. And I think if there would have been a keto group for your life, even afterwards, like the number of patients that say, Doc, I lost the weight, but now I realize I have some, emotional needs that I just thought that I was nourishing with my food. And now I need to find something to fill in. How do I fix that?
Oh, well, I can absolutely say for a fact that, yes, the surgery helped me lose a big chunk of weight quickly. Certainly not all of it. And it does start that momentum. But I was very much left on my own. Here's the surgery, here's what we think you should be eating, which was completely wrong.
Right.
And started to wonder why I was still hungry all the time. How can I be hungry all the time when my, 75% of my stomach's been removed? That doesn't,
right.
That doesn't work, because they've been getting me to eat carbs. That's why. But that was the big change for me that allowed me actually to harness that advantage that I'd been given and sustain it and move forwards without that I am pretty certain that I would have had regain and I would have got back to where I started. I mean, that happened after the first surgery. But it was finding that group of people, finding that support group and building those relationships, and also building a relationship with a counsellor who helped me. That was another, my sort of perfect storm of different things that came together that have made me be able to maintain that. But yes, I think you're absolutely right. I think those relationships and that support group system, wherever it is, if you can do it locally, face to face, that's fantastic. But online is just as powerful. It certainly has been for me. I live in the middle of nowhere in France. So my online group has been my support, and has been why I've been as successful in keeping that weight off as I have.
It's real.
So yes.
Daisy, your story is so common, though, that there's a chapter in that book called The Dangers of Gastric Bypass. And what I most get angry about is they take these patients whose brain is not working right. It can't be with by definition, they have to be like 150 pounds overweight or 100 pounds overweight. So just start with that.
Oh, yes, they absolutely sit there. They get you on the scales. How tall are you? He literally had this. It was like a dial thing that he turned to work out my BMI. And he says, right, yeah, this is the surgery. And first of all, it was the band. And then when I went back, he actually admitted in the end that the band, well, no, he didn't admit that the band was a bad operation. But he admitted it to the extent that he didn't use that operation anymore, which is as good as. But when I went back, I wanted the most restrictive possible. I went in there saying I wanted a gastric bypass, but he turned it. This is your BMI. This is the operation for you, gastric sleeve. And end of. It's very much just by the data. There was no, although they get you to get put together a dossier where you do talk to a psychiatrist for half an hour, but that's it.
Yeah.
But yes, it would be lovely to see, and I'm not saying take away weight loss surgery completely, but it would be lovely to see people go into a program where they were put on certainly a low carb, ideally a ketogenic diet, and had some emotional support for a given period of time, and telling them, right, at the end of this, 6 months, we'll talk again about the weight loss surgery. And if we still think together, you and us, a group of people helping you, that it's the right decision, then we'll do it. But I do wonder how many people would say at that point, oh, actually, no, let's just carry on doing this keto. So
I have a couple of great stories that give me the reason why I hear what you're saying. And that's the dream. And again, I feel like it's forging a path because I don't know how this works, because that doesn't cost much. In fact, you can use YouTube videos and a couple people saying, I just need a friend to walk through this with me. And you create these little tribes of support system.
And a local support group, like you were saying, who watches videos every week and
say, just check in, keep coming. You can call it book study or wine club. Let's call it keto club or whatever. And you check in. And if there's a physician saying, no, for free, I'm willing to say, start these groups. It's amazing what it does to patient healthcare. And for a population improvement, we can make a greater change in our American obesity epidemic than I ever could have writing prescriptions. I have an amazing story where my husband's weight when we first got married was, pushing, 250, 260 pounds. And he's 165 pounds today. So he says he was my first patient. But there's a tribe of people losing weight that I have worked with. It wasn't keto, but it was low carb and it was methodical. And she comes into my clinic and I, do these, I work her up and I take care of her problems, and she loses like 60 pounds. And she first had come in to get permission to get her knee replaced. And as you did the workup and said, you cannot go into surgery, you will die. You have an arrhythmia in your heart. We have to fix this. And it was sleep apnea treatment and all these other things that had to be fixed if she wanted to survive surgery. So now at 6 months later, she's lost 50 or 60 pounds. Her knee does not hurt. She is now in for her pre-op for the second time. And I'm like, well, let's hear about your knee pain. And she said, oh, it's gone. And I said, well, why are you doing this surgery? Oh, well, I just wouldn't want to disappoint the surgeon. He's expecting me next week, and I already canceled on him once. And I'm sitting there trying not to holler like,
wow.
You're going to let a knife cut into your leg and remove a knee that doesn't hurt because of, but it is a cultural thing that says the surgery will fix this. And then I won't ever have this problem again. I'm like, have you talked to anybody with a knee replacement? There are plenty of problems. And it's a great reserve to have in the future. Absolutely. But let's first start with those who have knee pain. And I think that brings back the testimony to say, in the chapters of life where patients go in to ask for help with weight loss, their brains are not working right by definition. And if we can infuse a culture of change by, creating micro support systems that are like no cost, like it doesn't cost anything to have a keto group, even one online. And that change in behavior is where this diet is my favorite first step for, by the time you end up reading the book, it sounds like snake oil.
That's the problem, isn't it? You feel like you have to check yourself because you feel like you're sounding really preachy because, as you're talking about that with weight loss and knee surgery, but, you could go on with this list of this should be the first line of defense that could save the NHS if you're in the UK, healthcare systems, wherever you are, or the person themselves if they're paying for it. But, we're talking about potentially stopping medication and operations for obesity, type 2 diabetes, or the mental health. It is just incredible the amount of money this costs people and countries and the percentage of that could be wiped out. It's mind-blowing, but you do appreciate how you sound a bit like a crazy snake oil person when you're talking about it. Because people just say, well, it can't be that easy. You're just being ridiculous.
Right. And I am floored with how many times I have to catch myself like, oh, the fire hose is going again. I've given them too much too quick. Like they're never going to believe it. And that is where I think it works so much better to have that local example of a tribe member. The decisions patients make today, they have prices in the future. My dad is sitting on the edge of he's 75 years old. He has kidneys that are 25% functioning. And when he gets sick, it goes down to about 18%. And he is a refused dialysis kind of guy. That's not what he wants in his life. I look back at the last 20 years of his life and wonder if I would have been able to put these decisions in front of him saying, maybe you don't go all the way keto, but when mom's cancer needed keto, you did it and so many things improved and you've lost weight and you feel better. But the consequences of those decisions that came for the last 20 years are clearly impacting the decisions you have today. And when you fast forward, Daisy's life in the next 20 years, what will gastric bypass turn into in the future? That decision is there and it's been made. And at the time, it was the best decision you could think through.
Well, that's one of the things I'm thankful actually that because I had the sleeve, not the bypass. I don't want to scare people who have had bypass surgery, but I know the surgeon advised me at the time. He said, "No, you're too young and you're not heavy enough for me to go that drastic. This has, fewer lasting issues and fewer problems." But I could see from what he said that he was concerned about bypass surgery, and then it was something that you only did if you really had to. So. Yes, I'm thankful that I ended up with the sleeve. But yes, in an ideal world, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have had my gallbladder out, possibly, which he insisted to do before he did any surgery. But you can't undo it, so you have to make the most of what you have.
Yeah, and the number of patients that I've had amputations on, and you look at irreversible things that impact quality of life. You do have a great quality of life, and you'll probably have one till your grave with what your situation is. You do live in 2018, where the science of medicine is at your fingertips in nearly every country. Like, even though there's third world countries, you still can find access to amazing care. And with that being said, if we took this type of nutrition and education to my malnourished kids in Haiti, instead of eating rice and beans every day, they have foie, they have liver. And that process of saying, let's focus on changing the way we don't just enrich our lives and our weight loss and the improvement, but even the underserved, that it is cheaper. I mean, you say, oh, this is an expensive diet. No, I don't believe that. The number of meals they eat is much less. The nourishment is higher. The quality of energy is more stable. And I mean, I'm continually floored how much less I think about food. Even 2 years into this now, that when I tell patients that, they're like, oh no, I'm not that person that forgets to eat. I'm like, of course you're not. You've got carbs going in every 3 hours. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. I think it's interesting when you were talking about how you talk to people about it. I think we almost have to undersell it a little bit to start with, so we don't sound like zealots.
When I wrote that book, one of the first things I had to do for my mom, and that's why it ends up in the beginning of the book, was to say, all right, I was a skeptic. Like, this has to be ridiculous. And so though that first chapter is me going through, well, that's interesting. And then I got the little more data, and then there were autopsies, and that's pretty hard to like sneak in the bad stuff. Like, there's big pharma and cover-ups, but autopsies are pretty tough to cover it up. And they were profound brains. They looked beautiful. And that's where you got me. Like, oh, I have brain envy as I look at this diet through the foggiest brain I'd ever had. And I contend that had it not been for, my mom's choice point and then just stepping into that circle with her, I would have never written a book. That takes a lot of focus. And I think the next chapter of medicine is going to be the best one yet.
Absolutely. I look forward to hearing about it. I'm glad that this all had a happy ending, or, relatively happy ending. Things seem to be going the right way now.
Yeah, it's a good time for the interview.
Yeah, we caught it at the right moment.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. I wonder if you could wrap us up with a top tip.
Yes, I've thought about my top tip. The top tip that I have for anybody considering a keto diet, or even if you're a woman that's just going through a tough valley, is to find a tribe. Find your tribe. The value of that connection of somebody walking with you, whether it's your husband, whether it's a girls' club and you call it keto group or book club or wine club or Bible study, finding those relationships to journey through a valley is the reason that our minds and our hearts connect to people. And I think that I've been the rope to help other folks out of their valley. And boy, I am so thankful for the rope that my husband has been as I have walked out of my valley, or am walking out of my valley, and that I walk my mom out of her valley and those other small tribes. So my top tip, find a tribe. It doesn't have to be sexy. It doesn't have to be big, but meet once a week just to have coffee and say, I've had a crappy week. It doesn't cost you money, but you cannot believe the interactions and the connection that you hold on to as you step into a valley and then step out of it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. It's been a privilege to hear your story.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I feel honored to be part of the list, and I look forward to future conversations about there's many times I'm listening to the podcast saying, oh, I would totally love to teach them about what they're struggling with right there. But
oh, yes. I have a list for episodes I'd like you to come back and talk
Okay.
about. different subjects. So we'll talk about that in a minute.
Use me. Absolutely. Well, thanks again, and keep up the great work. Say the same to the 2 Keto Dudes for helping get this started and to continue to support you.
Yes, they're fabulous mentors. Thank you very much, Annette. To get the resources and links from the show, please go to ketowomanpodcast.com. Are you my next extraordinary woman? Maybe you've got an idea for a show, a topic you want to hear about. Let me know how I can tickle your earbuds by dropping me a line at daisy@ketowomanpodcast.com. If you fancy joining me on this exciting adventure and want to help me create new episodes, please go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/ketowoman, or simply hit the support button on the Keto Woman podcast website. It's thanks to the 2 Keto Dudes that I'm hosting this podcast, so please consider heading to their Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com and help them bring you more podcasts like this one. Please help other people hear about and find this podcast by reviewing the show on iTunes and Facebook. Every star and review really does help. It doesn't go unnoticed by me, the people who regularly like, share and comment on my posts. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. This week's end quote is from Dame Judi Dench. It is not good to cross the bridge before you get to it. Bye-bye, Keto Lovelies.